All right, how's everybody doing today? I don't think you can see my face, but I'm here. I'm wearing my LeBron James GOAT T-shirt today because the Lakers won last night, and I'm always excited when they win. We're going to talk today about humanism a little bit more, as well as humanist authors. So we talked about this before. We've talked about humanities and why humanism is so important. Humanities in general just means interest in ancient Greek or Roman cultures. And you had different types. You had scholastic, which was basically, the way of learning about it. So that'd be education. All right. You had different subjects like humanities, and you had individual accomplishments. Humanists emphasize what individuals could do. The roots of this, your first kind of works were by Dante. Dante is an Italian writer who talked about what the world could become if we focused on human nature. You also have historians believing that Dante, Boccaccio, and Petrarch were the ones who really took this to the next level and started trying to, I'd say, implement humanist ideology along the educated class. They also, it kind of seems like a funny thing and something we wouldn't realize, but people started writing in everyday language. This was known as vernacular. So instead of writing language, everything in Latin, it was written in your native language. So the English wrote in English, the Germans wrote in German, the Italians wrote in Italian, so that the average person, or at least the more literate people, could read it. Latin was the preferred language. It was the language of the church. But part of what made humanist writing appealing was that it wasn't written in the language of the church. It was written in the language of the people. And that's an important thing. This humanism is going to have an impact on a number of levels, not just educational or scholastic, but it's going to have an impact on art, on literature, on medicine, on architecture, like all kinds of things. And I think we think of it largely from an art standpoint, but from a literary standpoint, it's important. And here are these kind of key figures. You've got Dante on the left, you've got Boccaccio in the middle, and then, of course, you've got Petrarch on the right. Interesting, all of these guys were very religious, but still secular. They saw the value of looking at things in different perspectives. They didn't look at it as weakening religion. They looked at it as strengthening their beliefs. Okay. Now, just because humanism was catching on doesn't mean it was the only thing. You have Savonarola, my fault, who was a Dominican friar who basically thought humanism was terrible and that it was essentially moving away from God. It was seen as too secular, too hedonistic, too corrupting. And he is referenced in Bonfire of the Vanities in 1497, in which he basically burns books, artwork, jewelry, and other luxury goods in public to condemn this new sort of humanist lifestyle that was sweeping Italy really from the start. And so Botticelli, who's one of the great artists at the time, he put some of his own paintings in the fire, which I think is kind of interesting. Anyway, as a result, he was executed. People, thought this was too extreme, too ridiculous, and so he was burned in 1452. Anyway, different kind of perspective here on how society was kind of moving forward. Anyway, the secular writers, though, are important to understand, and that's what our focus is today. Early 1500s life in Italy seemed insecure and precarious. Church no longer served as a source of stability and peace. And so you start to have this idea of a more worldly and secular view other than just simply spiritual. Humanists argued that individual achievement and education can be fully expressed only if people use their talents and abilities in service of cities. This gives the idea of service or civil service, like the Romans would have done. This idea of like serving your country as opposed to just serving yourself or serving your church. You also have this concept of the Renaissance man that becomes a really important thing. The ultimate Renaissance man is usually referred to as Leonardo da Vinci, my bad. It's this concept that you're good at many things. Very accomplished in the classics, but also a man of action, respond to situations, just an all-around talented, skilled person. Okay. They start to advise what it means to be sort of civilized, how educated people look. Castiglione wrote the Cordier, which describes how a perfect Renaissance gentleman should act, how gentlewomen should act. The book includes fictional conversations between dukes and guests, this kind of idea of how the world should operate. Castiglione gave nobles rules to talk about their behavior. They should know many things like Latin and Greek. They should be well acquainted with poetry and history, be able to write poetry. And then you also have a guy by the name of Machiavelli, who some of you have heard of, who was a philosopher, a statesman. He wrote The Prince, which is probably one of the most important books in the last 500 years, which lays out how essentially government should operate, things that we still talk about today. If you've ever heard the phrase, it's better to be feared than loved, that's from him. The ends justify the means, that's Machiavelli. Lots of different things that he comes forth. In fact, in a normal year, we would read a bunch of excerpts from it. Instead, you're going to do like a short little worksheet on it. But he's an important figure. And there he is, because we need to see. That's Castiglione. Here's Machiavelli. And anyway, a couple more things on Machiavelli before we wrap this up. Basically describes men as ungrateful, advises rulers to separate morals from politics, that basically power and ruthlessness is more useful than idealism. I think we're living through that sort of in our own political environment. The ruler must do whatever is necessary to maintain political power, even if cruel. And then Machiavelli's theory that the end justifies the means deviates from accepted views of correct behavior, and that the state, an entity of itself, is separate from its ruler. That's how you start to become a foundation of political power. That separation of state and its ruler are different. The ruler rules the state. The ruler is not the state. That's a different concept that hadn't really been around at this point in time. That we'll stop there. All right. I have posted an assignment over Machiavelli I want you guys to do that will not be due until Tuesday. All right. Have a good weekend.